is a great program because I saw it last year. Some of you might have seen it and you came back because you liked it so much, or you're new, and I can guarantee you're going to really enjoy this. But before we get started, I don't have any programs until January, so I'm not going to go into a long list. Go to our website and see what we have coming up, and I'll be reminding you later. But I will let you know that our concert for January is on January 9th. That's a Sunday at 2 p.m. Mark Valente, who's a classical pianist, will be playing some classical selections for us. And it's a virtual concert, so you would sign up online like you did for tonight's. So speaking of tonight's, we have Leslie Goddard returning. She's been with us several times before, but just last year, she presented Remembering Marshall Fields at Christmas, and it was such a huge hit, such a great turnout, and so much positive feedback that we decided to have her come back again this December and walk us through. She gives what she calls an illustrated lecture because she has fantastic vintage photographs. And we're going to see and hear some of the backstories about the holiday windows, the big tree in the Walnut Room, Santa, Christmas catalog, the employees party. She's got the dish on all of it. So please, one more thing. If you have any questions, you can put them in chat. Leslie will answer them at the end, or if you just would rather wait till the end, and you can turn on your mic and ask her yourself. But please welcome Leslie Goddard.
Thanks. And if you were here earlier, you might have heard me mention one thing I love about doing this program on Zoom is I could bring out some of the things from my collection. Like I have my Frango mint ornament, and I have an Uncle Mistletoe music box, statue. So it's kind of fun to do it this way. I'm going to start by saying I have no connection to Macy's. I was sales associate at the Oakbrook store for 1 year. My real connection to Marshall Fields is through my grandfather. He worked at the State Street store for about 26 years. But really, I'm a historian. And I got interested in Marshall Fields history partly because I just loved the store, but also because I was working on a book project. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. There's the old Marshall Fields storefront at Christmas. Going to Marshall Fields any time of year was pretty special, but there was something about this store at Christmas time that was really special. And you might know it if you hear the phrase Christmas at Marshall Fields. If you're like many people who grew up in the area, you might immediately think of those animated windows, or the great tree in the Walnut Room, or Santa in cozy Cloud Cottage, or Uncle Mistletoe, things like that. When I was doing the work on my book, here's the cover of my book, Remembering Marshall Fields, I was amazed at how many memories of this store link up with Christmas time. And it's probably not surprising. Department stores and Christmas go right hand in hand. But I want to look back at the history of these Christmas traditions particularly, because I think it's fascinating what this store did to make it so special at Christmas. However, I am not going to start at the beginning of the story. I want to start at the end. I want to start with Christmas of 2005, because this would be the last Christmas under the name Marshall Fields. The company had just been acquired by a new owner, Federated Department Stores. They had announced that in September of 2006, all Marshall Fields stores would be renamed and rebranded as Macy's. One reporter said, this might rank as the most unpopular decision in the history of corporate America. And people who loved this store really did start descending on the State Street store for that one last Christmas there. The windows that year told the story of Cinderella. They used these illustrations by a children's illustrator, Diana Marie Huff. So they have these wonderful lavender and lime green and butter yellow colors. Here's another one. At this point, the windows took about 18 months from initial idea to installation. The whole idea was generated in-house, but the actual construction was done by an outside exhibition firm. The day that the windows were unveiled, they handed out silver scepters to visitors on the street, and a live Cinderella arrived, and the window curtains were raised to unveil it all. This was a big deal to see the windows. In keeping with the whole glass slipper kind of idea, the great tree in the Walnut Room that year had a kind of a crystal theme. They hung a lot of Swarovski crystals on that tree. I'm going to see if I can show you a video of who they got to do the official lighting. Hopefully this will play for us.
Actor Billy Crystal helped light a historic Christmas tree in downtown Chicago today. Crystal flipped the switch on the 45-foot tall tree at Marshall Fields. This will be the final year for the Marshall Fields Christmas tree and window display. Federated Department Stores bought the Chicago retailer this year and says it will change the name to Macy's by next fall. Marshall Fields was founded in Chicago back in 1852.
Isn't that cute? They had Billy Crystal in to do the lighting. At this point, the Walnut Room tree had about 1,200 ornaments and needed about 15,000 twinkling lights. People no longer had to wait in line 2 or 3 hours to get a table because they had introduced pagers just a few years before. During the Christmas rush that year, the Walnut Room served about 4,000 meals a day. That is 10 times what it served the rest of the year. Now, the reason I start in 2005 is because to a lot of Chicagoans who had been experiencing Christmas at Marshall Fields for years, it must have kind of felt, and it did kind of feel, like it had always been that way, like there had always been a great tree in the Walnut Room and animated Christmas windows and chicken pot pie on the Walnut Room menu. But of course it wasn't. Early histories of the store only rarely mention Christmas, and certainly nothing to do with Christmas displays. So let's take a quick look at the history of the store. Marshall Fields' history, as you might have heard in that clip, it's usually dated back to 1852. That is the year of the arrival in Chicago of the founder of this whole great enterprise, who was, of course, Potter Palmer. Believe it or not, this is one of the few great American department stores not founded by the person whose name it had. Potter Palmer, you might know better, for a certain hotel that he also started in Chicago. But when he arrived in Chicago in 1852, the first thing he did was to start a dry goods business on Lake Street. He eventually sold the business, though, in the 1860s to this guy, Marshall Field, with his fabulous mustache, and his partner, Levi Leiter. They ran the business for a while as Field, Leiter and Company. They eventually relocated it to the corner of State and Washington. They went through the Great Chicago Fire. They went through some big economic ups and downs, but they built the company into Chicago's largest and most prestigious department store. Then in 1881, Levi Leiter retired and the firm was reorganized to become Marshall Field and Company, which it would be known as in perpetuity, or until 2006, because perpetuity is not what it used to be. Here's what the Marshall Field store looked like in about the mid-1890s. He continued growing the store. He was creating not just a dry goods business, and that was a store that sold mostly fabrics and textile items, but a full-blown department store. He had this fabulous manager of retail. See if this name sounds familiar to you. H.G. Selfridge, if anyone watched Mr. Selfridge on PBS, that great show. Mr. Selfridge was known for starting Selfridge's department store in London, but he actually got his start at Marshall Fields. And he, more than anyone, is credited with building this store into a full-blown department store. He added in shoes and books and bric-a-brac and fine china. And it was always run under Marshall Fields policies. Very high quality for all merchandise, strong attention to customer service. There's a famous story that once Marshall Field was walking through the store and he saw a manager arguing with a customer. So he went over and asked, "What's the problem?" And the manager said, "It's nothing. I am just settling a complaint." And Marshall Field said, "No, you're not. Give the lady what she wants." And that became the store's mantra. For many years, though, Marshall Fields was very careful to maintain its position as the most prestigious store. This was a store that covered its windows on Sundays, so no one is, window shopping on Sundays. He resisted Marshall Field for a long time, starting food service. He only opened a restaurant in the store in 1890. And there's a cute story about why. This is the Marshall Fields Tea Room in the 1890s. The story goes that in 1889, there was a hat saleswoman, a woman named Mrs. Herring. She had some customers. It was getting close to lunchtime, so they were going to go home for lunch. Very few restaurants in downtown Chicago in 1889 would serve unaccompanied women. So most women went home. These were restaurants that largely grew out of saloons and taverns, and women did not go there by themselves. So Mrs. Herring offered her customers her own chicken pot pie, her grandmother's recipe, so they could stay in the store and shop, which they did. When Mr. Selfridge heard about that, he almost immediately convinced Marshall Field to open a tea room. And from then on, every time the store expanded, the restaurant space expanded too. Still, throughout all these years, only modest attention paid to Christmas. Now, partly that's because Christmas then was not the big to-do that it is today. Do you know Christmas was not even a national holiday until 1870? And yes, there was gift giving and putting up trees. Marshall Fields ran some advertisements for Christmas gift ideas, but it wasn't like the whole store got decorated the way we think of it today. But that changed in 1907. 1907 was a big year for Marshall Fields because that is the year they completed construction on the building you see here. Does it look maybe a little bit familiar? It might, because this is the building that is there today. This is the building on State Street. It goes all the way from Randolph to Washington. We're looking sort of at the middle of this photograph. The middle right is the corner of Washington and State Street. This building went up in 2 stages, but the completion came in 1907. And when it opened, a lot of space on the 7th floor was given over to restaurants. And the most elegant restaurant was the one on top of the South Lightwell. It was paneled with this beautiful Circassian walnut. So of course, they called that restaurant the South Grill Room. Isn't that terrible? It was an awful name. Customers started referring to it as the restaurant with the beautiful walnut paneling, and eventually they did change the name to the Walnut Room. Here's the Walnut Room as it looked about 1910. Now, reportedly, the very first year that the Walnut Room was open, some employees decided they ought to have a Christmas tree, so they brought in one and decorated it themselves. Now, I'm not showing you a photograph of it because, as far as I know, no photograph was ever taken of it. It was just a small thing done by an employee, by employees. But this is the first mention we have of a Christmas decoration at Marshall Fields. At this point, the store had been around for 55 years. Potter Palmer had passed away. Marshall Field had passed away. The store was already established. But wow, it did not take long for Christmas to become a big deal at Marshall Fields. Within 20 years, the store was advertising that it had the world's largest indoor Christmas tree. We're looking here at the 1938 Walnut Room tree. At this point, the tree required about 200 boxes of tinsel to cover it. Do you remember those tinsel icicles that you had to put on one at a time and it took forever? Can you imagine doing that on a tree like this? And the tree was always around 46 to 48 feet tall. So that's a lot of tinsel that's needed. By the 1940s, the store was saying that it required about 1,500 ornaments to decorate it. So about a dozen craftsmen would already be at work on the ornaments in July. Notice in this photograph, this is one of the 1940s trees. Notice the height of the ceiling. That's the atrium in the Walnut Room. The height, the ceiling was lowered by about 2 floors in the late 1940s, just to create more storage space upstairs. But it's kind of fun if you compare this photograph with this one taken in 1951. You can see, here, I'll go back so you can see it. Here's the 1940s. And here is 1951. They lowered that ceiling. Just fun trivia to know. Notice also, I think in this photograph, you can see the different sizes of the ornaments. They ranged from about 18 inches wide on the lowest branches down to 4 or 5 or 6 inches on the uppermost branches. That was to emphasize just how soaring that enormous tree was. Now, this was a live tree. They did not switch to an artificial tree until 1963. So even though the tree in the photograph here looks nice and symmetrical, it's not nearly as symmetrical as the 1973 tree that you see here, which was artificial. I want to show you one of my favorite years. In 1998, the theme was The Grinch Who Stole Christmas. If you look in the upper right on this photograph, can you see that little figure of the Grinch? It's the Grinch and he's stealing some of the decorations from the tree. I just love that. But let's go back to when it was a live tree. They would send some Marshall Fields employees up to Minnesota or Michigan in the fall to choose the perfect tree. It had to be a perfectly symmetrical evergreen, preferably a balsam fir, about 70 feet tall. They would chop off the upper 45 feet or so, lower it carefully, and then haul it by sled to a railroad car so it could be transported to Chicago. Then, on a Saturday night, they brought it in through the Randolph Street entrance. They would remove the revolving doors at Randolph Street, slide the tree in, bring it to the North Light Well, that's what you're seeing in this photograph, and then literally hoist it up the North Light Well with everyone holding their breaths that it didn't fall, all the way up to the 7th floor, and then moved into position on top of that drained fountain in the Walnut Room. This whole procedure took about 3 hours. And only then could they set up 3-story tall scaffolding around it. And that's when a team of 18 decorators would get to work. Typically, there would be a fire extinguisher system wound through the branches in order to spray a chemical extinguisher in case a fire broke out. And actually, once the tree was ready to go, there was a team of 3 firefighters. So the first of them would take their position. They worked rotating shifts to guard this tree because, you know, it's a live tree in the middle of a department store and fire was always a danger. That continued till they switched to that artificial tree in 1963. Although I spoke with a woman who worked in the Walnut Room, and she said she had customers who said, "We come here every year because we love that smell of balsam in the air." Isn't that great? As early as the 1940s, it was already a tradition among Chicagoans to dine under the great tree in the Walnut Room at Christmas. And it became sort of a sacred thing. This is when the Walnut Room became, as one reporter put it, ground zero in Chicago during December. And I don't know if anyone went to the Walnut Room in mid-century, but It was a big deal. You got dressed up. I love this publicity photograph because everyone in this picture is so dressed up. You know, the girls have their hair curled and looks like mom and grandma have their best hats on. It was an occasion. One beloved tradition that I have not been able to date its starting date is the fairy princess. But I know at least by the early 1970s, they would hire young women to dress up as princesses and go table to table in December, inviting customers to make a Christmas wish while she sprinkles fairy dust on their heads, actually glitter, which gets all over everything. But a good example of how new traditions were always being introduced, even as certain traditions became very established and year to year. Now, part of the point of all of these traditions was to spread Christmas cheer, but it also was to try and get you inside the store and in a festive mood to go shopping. And there was always great shopping at Marshall Field's at Christmas. Interestingly, when Marshall Field's opened its first toy department, which was in 1885, it was only at Christmas. The store did not have a year-round toy department until 1912. But Marshall Field's toy department at one point was said to be the largest in the country. It specialized in dolls. They said they had the largest collection of foreign and collectors' dolls in the world. In the 1940s, the whole toy department section would be decorated at Christmas time. It was usually called Candy Cane Lane because it had those giant candy canes around the columns, which really does almost create a candy cane archway you walk through. The toy department was so famous, oops, sorry, wrong way, that even as late as the 1970s, there was a feeling among a lot of Chicagoans, if you needed to buy toys, it was worth making a special trip to State Street to go to Marshall Field's because they had the best toys in the city. But toys were not the only great gifts. Marshall Field's had fabulous books. The book department sold not only bestsellers, but first editions and collectors' books. The China department was renowned and crystal. Many of the candies that the store sold were made right in-house. I don't know if you know this, but the Marshall Field State Street building is 13 stories tall with 3 sub-basements, but the sales floors never went higher than floor 9. Those upper floors were for behind the scenes work. That's where the ad department was, the accounting, the executive offices, the employee cafeteria. They even had up there an employee store where they sold fabulous bargains. So for example, if someone returned a man's monogram dress shirt, it couldn't be sold again. So they would sell it at a huge discount to employees. And I spoke with a woman who said, my husband never cared. So I got him these great shirts with someone else's initials. And every morning she would say to him, oh, good morning, honey. So what are your initials today? Depending on his shirt. But they also had the Marshall Field's Candy Kitchen. And they made a lot of different candies there, but probably most famously, Frango Mints. This is the earliest Frango Mint advertisement for Marshall Field's I have ever found. This one dates to 1947. Can you see the price on this ad? It was $1.50 a pound. This year, I think it's something like $23 a pound. Isn't that amazing? By the 1970s, they had at least 4 different flavors. They had mint, lemon, coffee, and rum. At this point, a box was, I think it's $6 a pound. So huge inflation, right? By the time that Frango production left Chicago in 1999, the Candy Kitchen was making 1.3 million pounds of Frango chocolates annually. During the holidays, they ran 3 shifts, 150 employees total, just to keep up with all the demand for Frango chocolates. But no matter what department you bought a gift in, if you bought a gift from Marshall Field's at Christmas, you could get a Christmas box to take it home with. Do you remember when the boxes were those nice, sturdy cardboard boxes? And for a long time, the design changed annually. I love this particular design, but it changed pretty frequently. Some of these are very collectible. Typically, the store's gift boxes would either say Marshall Field and Company, or they would have that MF and Co. logo on them. Some great collectors even date these. Some people have complete collections. Some people have just saved them because they love the boxes. One of my favorite quotes about Marshall Fields is from a blogger, a guy named James Iska. He said, "The pinnacle of department stores in Chicago, Marshall Fields was my mother's domain. She wouldn't set foot in any other store on State Street. My grandmother, on the other hand, only went to Fields for the boxes bearing the store's name, in which she would wrap the presents she bought at Goldblatt's." Isn't that great? Now, if you have great eyesight, you might even be able to see in the box in the upper left is the slogan, "The Store of the Christmas Spirit." That slogan originated in 1909. And it really was something that the store took seriously. Here's the box by the 1990s. They had switched to almost always the same type of design. It was usually just a red box. Although it was exciting when the regular green boxes disappeared and the red Christmas boxes came out. But the idea was when you went into Marshall Fields at Christmas time, there would be Christmas all around you. The store would have the most festive decorations, the best gift ideas, and the kindest and most courteous employees, which could be challenging because the store hired as many as 4,000 extra workers during the holidays just to keep up with the demand. But here's the thing. Even if you never set foot in Marshall Fields, if you never bought anything at Marshall Fields, there was one holiday tradition you could still enjoy at Fields, and that was the Christmas windows. Let's go back to the early days of Marshall Fields. In those early days, and really up until about 1907, glass manufacturing did not permit windows big enough to have big, elaborate displays. And window shopping, it existed, but it wasn't as big a deal as it later became. It really wasn't until glass technology improved and the windows got bigger and bigger that window displays became a primary form of merchandising. In 1907, that new building featured these enormous plate glass windows marching all across the store's facade on State Street. This opened new opportunities for the store to use window displays, and it did. Mr. Selfridge hired a great window display designer, a guy named Arthur Fraser. Arthur Fraser, coming in the 1890s, made Marshall Fields windows nationally renowned. And that was important because Chicago's population was growing in the 1890s, early 1900s. Stores were becoming very competitive. Window displays were a really good way for stores to compete. And Fraser made them famous. He would do things like you see in this picture. He would create these elaborate settings and then sometimes just put one dress in them. And of course, he's working for Marshall Fields. So he's got the cream of the crop of artists and construction workers to create these beautiful settings. In Arthur Fraser's era, Christmas windows consisted of elaborate displays of gift ideas. This is the big corner window at State and Washington in 1928. State and Washington windows was always reserved for toy displays. And they were animated in a way because any toys that could move would. So for example, if you look towards the lower left, there's a toy train there. It probably was running on its track. There's a Ferris wheel kind of at the middle center that probably was spinning. One year, they actually had a puppet stage, and every 4 minutes, some puppets would pop up and act out a little scene for you. But these are not narrative windows the way we think of them. They're not telling a story. And that was true right up through the early years of World War II. Here's a 1940s window. It looks like it's part of a story, but if you read the sign at the bottom, the sign says, "All through the house, a most Merry Christmas, furniture, 8th floor." This is a window advertising furniture that you might want to buy as a Christmas present. Things did not change to storytelling until 1944. That was the year Arthur Fraser retired and his successor, John Moss, took the windows in a new direction. Moss instituted the very first narrative Christmas windows at Marshall Fields in 1944. Here's one of them. The windows that year told the story of a visit from St. Nicholas. You know that famous poem, "'Twas the night before Christmas and all through the house, not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse." These windows were such a hit. They just repeated them again in 1945. Big hit. But here's the problem. A visit from St. Nicholas was in public domain. Other stores could copy the idea, and they did. What Marshall Fields needed was its own Christmas character. Now, the idea of a department store character was just coming into being, but some other stores already have them. I think maybe the most famous was the Christmas character invented for Montgomery Ward and Company. Anyone know the one that I'm thinking of? I'm thinking of this character named Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. The Montgomery Ward stores had been giving out coloring books for years. They would buy coloring books from outside vendors. But in 1939, a store executive thought, we could save some money if we created something in-house. So one of the store employees named Robert May was given the job of creating it, and he created Rudolph in 1939. He was an almost big hit. By the way, that red nose, that partly came about because he was inspired by just how foggy Chicago winters could be. Rudolph eventually went national, but he was not the only department store character. If anyone ever shopped at Wieboldt's, remember Wieboldt's? In the 40s and 50s, Wieboldt's sponsored the Cinnamon Bear. This was this darling little bear, Patty O'Cinnamon, who would take these children on magical trips looking for the lost star. So Marshall Fields wants its own character. They gave the job to Joanna Osborne. She is the one who created Uncle Mistletoe. These sketches are some of the earliest sketches I have ever seen for Uncle Mistletoe. These actually were drawn by Joanna Osborne's husband, Addis Osborne. But Joanna Osborne was inspired by her own uncle. She had this wonderful Norwegian uncle, very generous and friendly. The original idea was to have this chubby Dickens-like character who always wore a big red overcoat. He had giant bushy eyebrows. And can you see in these drawings, Uncle Mistletoe has wings. He has wings and an aviator scarf because he can fly. His job, he's sort of Santa Claus's ambassador. He is tasked with traveling around the world looking for children who remember to take time to be kind at Christmas. He was introduced to Chicagoans in the 1946 Marshall Fields Christmas windows. Those windows were so popular, they were repeated in 1947. And then in 1948, they gave him a wife, Aunt Holly. You might be able to see Aunt Holly. She's the character in the lower right in this picture. She's decorating a Christmas tree. Uncle Mistletoe and Aunt Holly soon became star attractions at Marshall Field and Company, appearing regularly in the animated narrative windows. And there was even a Little Golden Book. Remember Little Golden Books? Uncle Mistletoe in the book takes two children, a brother and sister, up to the North Pole to meet Santa Claus and then returns him. It's a very simple story based on the windows one year, but it's got that message, remember to take time to be kind at Christmas. In the 1940s and 50s, Uncle Mistletoe and Aunt Holly were a merchandise bonanza. The store started selling Uncle Mistletoe and Aunt Holly dolls, Uncle Mistletoe and Aunt Holly ornaments. I have some of my Uncle Mistletoe Christmas ornaments out. There were coloring books, all kinds of things. They even hired actors to dress up as Uncle Mistletoe and Aunt Holly. That was a pretty good way to help children pass the time while they're waiting in line to see Santa Claus. One of the reasons that Uncle Mistletoe became so wildly popular is that he starred in his own television show. This was a 15-minute show. It aired between 1948 and 1952, several times a week for 4 seasons. It was on the ABC affiliate for Chicago. Uncle Mistletoe was a puppet. He was voiced by Johnny Coons, the great Chicago voice actor. Well, if you think about television in 1948, that's about as early as it gets in Chicago children's television. Every kid with a TV was watching Uncle Mistletoe. The store even had a kindness club you could join. All you had to do was to write in a letter describing one act of kindness that you had done. By the time the television show went off the air, the Kindness Club had 15,000 members. And for years, if you went to the Walnut Room at Christmas time, you might even be able to see in this picture, at the very, very top of the Walnut Room great tree was Uncle Mistletoe looking down on everyone from below. It's a good way, right, to keep kids on their best behavior when they're eating in the Walnut Room. Someone gave me a copy of one of the Uncle Mistletoe record albums done by Eddie Howard and his orchestra. When I first got an Uncle Mistletoe album, I did not have a record player and I couldn't play it. Someone very kindly pointed me in the direction of a digital version of the records. So I was able to get a song. I want to play for you just a little snippet of the Uncle Mistletoe song. It's kind of a, what do you call it when you get a song stuck in your head? An earworm. So I'm not going to play too much of it because it can get very annoying very quickly. But to give you an idea of that kind of whimsicalness of Uncle Mistletoe.
The jolliest man I know, with the merriest ho-ho-ho. You're sure to love him so, your Uncle Mistletoe.
Okay, that's enough. It won't get stuck to your head too bad. This is one collector's Uncle Mistletoe and Aunt Holly collection. This was displayed at the 2014 Christmas Collectors Convention in Chicago. You can see in this picture, there are dolls and coloring books and glasses and coasters and puppets and ornaments. And towards the lower right in this picture, you might be able to see an Uncle Mistletoe ceramic cookie jar. These are really collectible. Every year I go on eBay to see if they're offering any. This year I found 2 of them. One of them was being offered for $650, and the other one was being sold for $1,100. So if anyone has one, do not drop it. They are highly valuable. Uncle Mistletoe's popularity did wane, although he's never totally disappeared. But later on, Virginia Paxson introduced the character of Freddie Fieldmouse. He debuted in 1973. He was later joined in 1977 by his wife, Marcia, whose name I love, because if you think about it, her name is Marcia Fieldmouse, Marshall Fields, Marcia Fieldmouse. Isn't that adorable? By the late 20th century, the Marshall Fields windows would alternate. So one year might be something very contemporary, like Harry Potter in 2000, and the next year something very Christmassy, like Night Before Christmas in 2001. Can you see Uncle Mistletoe off to the side there? The staff became experts at designing windows that everybody could enjoy. There had to be some small things up front for little kids to enjoy, and then bigger things for people at the rear. If you ever went there at a busy time of day, there might be people stacked 4 or 5 deep in front of every window. So no window could be designed to be seen only head on from the front. They had to look great from a lot of different angles. Fairy tales, this year, Night Before Christmas, the main part of each window told the story of 'Twas the Night Before Christmas, but down below were smaller windows. You can see it in this picture. Those told the story of a mouse family having their own Night Before Christmas. That was great for little kids and strollers to enjoy. Fairy tales like Snow White in 2004, these were always popular. And the window designers learned a lot of tricks. The Marshall Field's display windows were never heated or air conditioned. So they discovered they couldn't use shaved plastic as snow because it might melt under hot lights. Most often they used kosher salt, tons and tons of salt. It pours beautifully, it doesn't melt, it doesn't stick to everything the way that styrofoam does. For water, they often used motor oil because it doesn't freeze as easily as water does, and it kind of glistens like water. Now, store executives always said, these windows are the store's gift to the city. You never have to shop at Marshall Field's to enjoy them. But really the goal was to make the Marshall Field's store a destination and to associate Marshall Field's with the holiday season. It was part of the way that Marshall Field's cemented its reputation as the most prestigious, the leading retail institution in Chicago. And it worked. Going to see the Marshall Field's windows was an annual tradition for a lot of Chicago families. In other words, even though the windows were not selling merchandise, they were in a way selling something. They were selling Marshall Field's institutional leadership, its position at the top of the hierarchy of stores. But here's an example of how well they did that. One man who grew up in the Chicago area told me when he was growing up in the 40s, he knew, he said, all the other men in red suits and fake beards were just Santa's helpers. But at Marshall Field's, you could talk to the real Santa. Now, as far as I know, Marshall Field's had a live Santa Claus at least as early as 1907. The store in those days displayed or had the area with Santa with real taxidermied reindeer. Those are real reindeer you see in this picture. That might be why that child looks a little iffy, the little kid who's in the upper right. But for many, many years, Santa's home at Marshall Field's was cozy Cloud Cottage. This was up on the 8th floor. The 8th floor was the furniture department. And most of the year, this little miniature house was called the Trend House. It's where they did displays of interior decorating trends. But at Christmas, the entire house would be transformed into cozy Cloud Cottage. You'd wind through several rooms. This is Santa's room in 1953. Can you see? He's got portraits of the reindeer hanging on the wall. And next to Santa's chair, there is a book. That is the list of the names of good boys and girls. Actually, it was the names of children of Marshall Field's employees. Fun little thing you couldn't enjoy unless you had a relative who worked at Field's. Now, the store did have multiple different Santas over the years. If you visited, though, between 1962 and 1980, there is a good chance that you would have met Arthur C. Baldwin. He was a long-running Field Santa. He was a retired Marshall Field's employee. He said when he was asked to become Santa, he thought it was because, well, I had the build. 230 pounds, and I always liked children. He later said that every year, about 15% of his visitors were adults, and the adults always wanted the same thing. The men wanted a Mercedes-Benz or a Cadillac car. The women typically wanted either a mink coat or a boyfriend. When he finally retired to a nursing home, people still sent him letters and cards addressed to Santa Claus, DuPage Convalescent Center, Wheaton, Illinois. And they reached him. Isn't that adorable? Now, here's what's amazing. All of the decorations, the cozy Cloud Cottage, the Christmas windows, the entire great tree in the Walnut Room, all of these decorations were created in-house in those craft room spaces up on the upper floors. And they were not just creating the places I've already mentioned. They also had to provide decorations for the toy section. Here's the toy section. I believe this is 1954. I mean, look at this. They even decorated the light fixtures. They made them look like little toy drums. And I haven't even mentioned the escalator landings. These were also decorated at Christmas. This is a cute little scene. It shows two kids in bed, and they're sitting up excited because Santa has accidentally awakened them. Santa at the front has ducked down so they won't see him. Santa is actually painted flat on a flat piece of plywood. That's because that elevator landing space was really, really narrow and they had to accommodate the space. But maybe even most exciting was the main aisle. The entire main aisle, that 385-foot long aisle from Randolph down to Washington Street, was fully decorated. And they usually changed every year. I believe this image is from 1937. It looks like these giant reindeer jumping over the main aisle. This, I believe, is 1942 with these big cutout illuminated trees. In 1956, they had decorations inspired by, do you remember those Christmas candle chimes? This was a German tabletop decoration. You'd light candles and the heat would make the chime move. So they had enormous versions of those going up into the light wells. Here is 1979. This year they had tableaus showing different generations coming downstairs on Christmas morning. You might be wondering, what happened to all these things after Christmas? Well, all of these displays would be dismantled and put into storage. And in future years, if they could, they would repaint or redress them and use them again. So a toy soldier one year might become a nutcracker the next year. Or they would be recycled out to the branch stores and the shopping mall stores. Once the display items really had worn out, then they would be sold off. Marshall Field's had these fabulous prop sales, and if you knew about them, you could pick up some great bargains. Now, if you go, let me go back one image. The main floor, as it looked in the 1950s, had these hand-carved, curved mahogany counters on the main floor. Those lasted for many, many years. But if you compare those cases with these in 1979, which are chrome and glass, you can see that the store was evolving. And one of the things Marshall Field's did really, really well was to stay rooted in certain beloved traditions, while at the same time evolving and introducing new traditions to remind people that this was not a store stuck in the past, that it was still up to date and modern. Marshall Field's walked that balance between being traditional and being modern very, very well. And you see it at Christmas time. Certain things remained the same, like a great tree in the Walnut Room, but new traditions kept being introduced. For example, the snowman sundae. This was an ice cream sundae. It's made with vanilla ice cream, a marshmallow head with a face drawn on. In the 1990s, the Walnut Room might be serving up to 1,000 of these sundaes a day. Sometimes they had to hire one person whose primary job was to paint faces on the marshmallows with red food coloring. I don't think that one in the front center there is that person's best work, but nonetheless. Marshall Field's annual holiday mug was hugely popular. This was a souvenir mug that you would get if you ordered a special drink, usually something like eggnog or hot cider. People would come to Chicago every year from as far away as Ohio or Iowa or Michigan to get their annual Marshall Fields mug. One year, and do I have it? Yeah, I have mine here. One year they tried to save money by switching to a white opaque plastic mug, and there was this outcry. I think it was a newspaper reporter who said, this is the kind of thing that can cause riots in the city of Chicago. The last big Christmas tradition that Marshall Fields introduced was this white teddy bear tradition. This debuted in 1906, although they actually borrowed the idea. The whole idea originated in Minneapolis. Dayton's department store started it. But in 1986, Marshall Fields picked up the tradition. They spent a reported $6 million to buy 450,000 of these huggable, squishy white teddy bears. That's said to be the largest one-time purchase of a single item. The bear was initially named Mistletoe Bear, and you can see that written on his hat in this photograph, because he came with a little card explaining how Uncle Mistletoe found him on his doorstep one Christmas Eve. The reason you might not remember him as Mistletoe Bear is because Marshall Fields united with Dayton and Hudson in 1991, and they unified the name as Santa Bear. So that's how you'll most often see him. He had a new outfit every year. In 1997, there was a sort of band leader, Santa Bear. In the year 2000, there was a bride and groom Santa Bear. My favorite might be 2001 when he was an astronaut. That's a nod to the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey. The very last year for Santa Bear was 2007, when they had a whole family in pajamas. After that, Macy's retired the trend. They said the whole trend had run its course. So they decided to, do I dare say it, put that trend to bed, leaving some people with enormous Santa Bear collections that some people still bring out to this day. So where are we today? Well, a lot of these traditions, of course, are gone. The Santa Bear tradition is gone. But a lot of them remain. And I'm not just talking about the collectible mugs, although they still have them. But if you go down to State Street today, the building today, it's still there. It's known as Macy's on State Street. It is a National Historic Landmark and a city landmark. If you look carefully, you might even be able to see it in this picture. In the lower left-hand corner, the store building has these enormous plaques that say Marshall Field and Company. Those must remain if the store is to retain its status as a Chicago city landmark. Visitorship at this store typically peaks in December during the Christmas shopping season. People still go downtown to see the animated windows. These days, usually it's more like 4 or 5 windows. They don't have a window display stretching all the windows on the State Street facade. But still, when you think about it, there were once 7 department stores on State Street. Of those 7, only one building on State Street is still operating as a department store, and that's the old Marshall Fields building. And it's the only one that still has any kind of animated Christmas windows. If you go inside, there is still a huge tree in the Walnut Room. I took this photograph of the tree in 2019. You might be able to see, it used to be that you could go up to the 8th floor to the viewing area and look down on the tree. You can no longer do that. Macy's has sold off space on those upper floors, so they have walled it off. But there is still a tree in the Walnut Room. They still seat most of the year about 500 people a day, but during the Christmas season, it can be as many as 10,000. This particular year, actually, they are requiring reservations, and the reservations filled up almost immediately. But if you are lucky enough to get one, you can still order Mrs. Herring's chicken pot pie. It is still on the menu. You can still buy Frango mints, although they are not $1.50. When I took this photograph in 2019, they were on sale for only $16 a pound. You can even still make a wish with a fairy princess, which of course I always have to do every time I go down there. I think it is remarkable that these holiday traditions, which were all designed to help support shopping at Marshall Fields, are still continuing to this day. We are now more than 15 years past the end of the name Marshall Fields officially. And yet for many Chicagoans, it still wouldn't be Christmas without a trip down to that building, without eating in the Walnut Room. It wouldn't be Christmas without a visit to Marshall Fields. I think that might be the very best indicator of just how beloved a store Marshall Fields was. So I am going to stop the formal part of my talk at that, because I want to take a few minutes here at the end to answer questions if anyone has any. So if you have questions, feel free. If you want to turn on your microphone, you can. Or feel free if you want to just, if you move your cursor, you'll see a little icon that says chat. You can go in there and type your question in there, and I'm happy to answer it. By the way, if anyone was curious, I have some of my Marshall Fields things out here. I have one of my Marshall Fields mugs. This is a miniature Santa bear. This one was from 2005, you can tell. This was a Marshall Fields themed one for 2005. And then I've got my Uncle Mistletoe. I even have an Uncle Mistletoe music box, which are, what do you call it? A music statue, something like that. So it's amazing how collectible Marshall Fields Christmas merchandise is. It's highly collectible. So any questions or stories? Yeah, go ahead.
Which store is older, Macy's or Marshall Fields?
Oh, good question. Good question. I don't know. If anyone has Google, could you look it up for us? I want to say Marshall Fields. For some reason, I'm thinking Macy's dates to the 1860s or 1870s. They're both very old stores. I know that for sure. One thing I will say is that Macy's and Marshall Fields always had different identities, by which I mean Macy's was always a store for budget shoppers. It always advertised that it had great prices. Marshall Fields was always positioning itself as more of a prestige kind of a store. So it was always different.
But it had pretty good prices in the basement though.
That is true, isn't it? If people don't remember, the basement for many, many years, that was the budget floor. And that's where you could get really good prices, but it was still good quality merchandise. Someone told me you knew you had made it in Chicago when you bought your first thing for full price from an upper floor at Marshall Fields. And I thought, yeah, that's pretty true. The budget floor was like the entry floor. I see someone's hand up, so feel free to turn your microphone on if you want to. I don't see a name. It's H. Yeah, go ahead.
This is Joanne L.
Oh, hi, Joanne.
This is the second time I think I've seen your presentation
Oh, nice.
last year. And this time I brought my mistletoe bear and he's been sitting on my lap.
Oh, I love
I think
it.
he came from maybe the late 70s.
Yeah, very much, very much. Oh, I'm so glad you have one.
And I also have a remembrance box of Marshall Fields that
Oh,
was filled with Frango mint that was given to me a few years ago by my
nice.
daughter. She thought I would like that.
Oh,
I did love that. And I
love it.
also have some towels, which I bought from the basement.
Yeah,
Marshall Fields.
there you go. There you go. Absolutely.
They were made in USA and they're still functional.
Nice. You know, it's interesting to me. I think that Macy's was expecting resistance from Chicagoans, but I don't think they were expecting quite as much anger as Chicagoans had. But, you know, it's interesting that Macy's has been selling a lot of merchandise that has Marshall Fields on it, like those Frango boxes. I mean, it's obviously they know how so many Chicagoans love Marshall Fields, and they'll buy Marshall Fields, you know, candy tins or T-shirts or bags and things like that.
They had the most wonderful array of food in the pantry in later years.
Yeah.
And you just walked in there and it would just smell so incredibly delicious.
Do you remember the deli section? They had like this great chicken salad. I remember it had almonds and things in it. It was so
Yes,
good.
yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Every department store, you know, not every, but a lot of the great department stores had food specialties, and Marshall Fields had quite a few, not only in the Walnut Room, but in that deli section too. And they used to have a little cookie called a hermit cookie. It was like a molasses cookie with raisins and spices and frosting on it. It was really, really good. Yeah, so it was not just Frango mints. There were a number of things. They also had this great cheddar cheese soup that was so good. I should see if I can find my recipe. Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, the recipe?
I think I saw it somewhere. I'll have to see if I can dig it out. Yeah.
Well, I checked, it's that Macy's opened in 1858.
Oh, it did. Okay. Earlier than I
And
thought.
Marshall Fields was at 1852.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Fields was older or was established first.
You know, there's a number of great department stores in the begun in the 1850s. Carson Peary Scott is another one of them. I think it was 1854 or something like that. And a lot of it was because, really, to be honest, it was because the 1850s was when you're starting to see urban areas really grow and transportation grow. I mean, the railroad was around, and that department stores started to grow when there was a concentration of people in big urban areas. So it would make sense, the 1850s. So thanks, that's good to know. Yeah.
Do you remember the Frango mint pie?
Yes. Oh, that was to die for. And they still have it with the Frango mint ice cream on the inside. And then there was like a crunchy top to it. Oh, so good. We used to always get that. Yeah. Yeah. So good. So good.
I remember being invited by a friend of mine umpteen years ago, and I think it was still Marshall Fields at the time, before we had lunch in the Walnut Room.
Oh, so nice.
I think we had either the chicken salad or
yeah,
we had soup too, but for sure we each had a piece of Frango mint pie.
Oh, I love it. I love it. My family always did that too. We always ended the meal at Christmas time with a slice of Frango mint pie, and it was just the best. Yeah. Yeah. A couple of years ago, they switched to an all buffet, and I was so distressed because they had a great table of desserts, but none of the desserts that year was Frango mint ice cream pie. And it was just not the same. You know, you don't mess with tradition.
No.
Since they had a buffet, I was there the last time, maybe it was 5 years ago. And is the buffet permanent now for Christmas, or?
No, they had said at the time that yes, it was going to be permanent. However, this year they have gone back to a menu because of the pandemic.
Exactly.
Now, I haven't heard whether they're going to bring back the buffet in coming years, and that's probably because they're going to have to wait and see what happens.
Right.
I know it's got to be a huge help as far as service goes, because a buffet, even though it takes a lot of work, still it does streamline things a bit.
Right. When you said 10,000 people during the holiday season, that's mind-boggling.
It really is. It really is, isn't it? And really, when you think about it, the fact that things, at least when I went there, and you know, my family, we used to go every year, and things went pretty smoothly. When I think about it, it's a pretty remarkable thing. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Does anyone else have any more questions for Leslie? Well, if not, I have to thank her again, and I hope that you all enjoyed this event as much as I did. Yes, I see clapping up there. Thank you, Amy. It's just a great program, Leslie, and people just as they have a special place for Marshall Fields in their heart during the holidays, especially, and then you bring all these memories back to us. It's just great. So thank you.
I'm glad. Well, thank you, and thanks to the Rolling Meadows Library for putting tonight together. So thanks for that. All right. Good night, everybody.
See you again soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much.